Edinburgh, 1841. At 19, Flora Fraser had never known what it was to be desired. She knew how to be useful. She knew how to hold her spine straight while pouring tea in her Aunt Lady Camborne's drawing room, during those endless gatherings where young ladies displayed their jewels, their charm, and more importantly, their family fortunes. She knew how to offer a polite smile whenever someone remarked that her face was interesting. Never beautiful, merely interesting. And she knew, above all, that her place in that golden world was behind the others. 2 steps behind, always 2 steps behind. That September afternoon, she stood near the tall window, adjusting the folds of the green velvet curtains, while her cousin's musical laughter drifted through the room. They were talking about him, the Duke of Strathearn, newly arrived from London, young, wealthy, devastatingly handsome according to Lady Penelope, and apparently seeking a wife. Flora did not turn. She did not need to. Men like him did not look at girls like her. Girls without dowry, without title, without anything to offer except refinement and a future as a governess or companion in some distant household. But then, the drawing room doors opened, and when Flora finally lifted her gaze, only for an instant, only because the sudden hush demanded it, she found his eyes, blue, striking, fixed on her as though every other woman in the room had ceased to exist. She looked away so quickly she nearly upset a vase of hydrangeas. Heat rushed up her neck. But worse, far worse, was the realization that the Duke was smiling at her. And Flora Fraser knew, with every quiet, careful part of herself, that such a thing was impossible, that it was dangerous, that men like him did not smile at women like her without a reason, and the reason was never love. There was something about the September light that had always felt cruel to Flora Fraser. It poured golden through the tall windows of the Camborne residence, catching on the fair hair of her cousins, glimmering over the jewels of the ladies who came to call. But when that same light reached Flora, it seemed to falter, to fade, as if it knew there was no brightness to be found there. She had grown up in the corners of that house, the daughter of a distant cousin who had died poor, taken in out of duty, educated out of obligation. Flora had learned French, the pianoforte, embroidery, and watercolor. She had learned to walk without making a sound, to speak only when spoken to disappear when needed. She had learned, above all, not to dream, for dreaming hurt. And she had learned far too young that the world did not reward girls who dreamed. It hurt to watch her cousins laugh with suitors while she arranged the sheet music. It hurt to hear promises of dances while she tied ribbons and fastened tiaras onto heads that would never be hers. It hurt to know that, at 19, her future had already been sewn shut. A quiet life, a useful life, a life of service. Perhaps as a governess, perhaps as a companion to some wealthy widow. Never a wife, never a beloved. Flora had accepted that, or she thought she had, until that afternoon, when a gaze, steady, unexpected, crossed the golden drawing room and found the one woman who did not believe she could be seen, the one who had taught herself to live without hope, the one who, for that very reason, would be the hardest of all to win. For Flora Fraser did not believe in fairy tales. She did not believe that dukes fell in love with girls who had no fortune. And she certainly did not believe that a man like the Duke of Strathearn, young, wealthy, admired by all, could desire anything more than a passing whim. But he would not give up. And Flora would learn that sometimes the greatest battle is not in claiming another's heart, but in allowing one's own heart to be claimed. Before we continue this tale of impossible affection and quiet courage, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so you won't miss the next stories of love found where it was least expected. Now, let us return to Flora and to the Duke of Strathearn. Chapter 1. Where Silence Begins. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the drawing room doors opened, and Flora Fraser felt the silence before she understood it. She stood by the tall window, adjusting the folds of the green velvet curtains that never quite hung evenly. An endless, pointless task her aunt invented merely to keep her occupied and out of sight. The crystal laughter of her cousins, the affected whispers of guests, the delicate clink of porcelain cups, all of it fell away at once, as if the very air had been drawn from the room. Flora did not turn. She didn't need to. She recognized that kind of silence, the kind that followed the entrance of someone important, someone worthy of attention, someone who would, without hesitation, overlook her entirely. She kept her fingers on the fabric and her eyes on the garden outside. September wind stirred the branches, and leaves had just begun to fall. Everything outdoors seemed prepared to die beautifully. Flora had always found it ironic, how nature made even endings appear poetic, while she struggled simply to appear useful. "Your Grace, what an honor to welcome you to our humble residence." Lady Camborne's voice rang out, sharp with eager reverence, the tone she reserved only for noblemen of the highest rank. A faint tightening formed in Flora's chest. A duke. It had to be the Duke of Strathern, the one who had occupied her cousin's conversations for days. Young, wealthy, devastatingly handsome, and, according to their breathless whispers, seeking a wife. Another one, Flora thought, in that quiet bitterness she had learned to hide. Another who would come, select one of her cousins, and continue on. As they all did. "Lady Camborne, the honor is mine," replied a deep, controlled male voice. A voice shaped by London and old money. Flora held her breath. She did not know why. Only that, suddenly, she needed to disappear, into the curtains, into the wallpaper, into nothing at all. "Your Grace, allow me to present my nieces," her aunt continued, her tone swelling with pride. "Lady Penelope, Miss Caroline, and Miss Louisa, all charming girls, of excellent upbringing." Flora heard the rustle of skirts, the practiced sweetness in their voices. She knew this performance. She had watched it more times than she could count. It always ended the same way, with her still invisible, and her cousins a step closer to their gilded futures. As it should be, Flora told herself, adjusting the curtain for the 10th time. They had dowries, they had names, they had futures. She had only— "And the young lady by the window?" Flora froze. Her own breath sounded too loud. The world seemed to tilt. She could not have heard correctly. He could not have meant— "Oh," her aunt replied, abruptly cold. "That is merely my distant niece, Miss Flora Fraser. She assists with household tasks. She is not truly part of the company, Your Grace." Merely. The word struck like a stone. Flora closed her eyes, breathed once. It should not hurt anymore. She had heard it so many times. Merely Flora, merely the useful one, merely there. "I see," the Duke said, and Flora waited for him to turn back to her cousins, to continue the familiar script, to forget her before truly seeing her. But then, footsteps. Firm, intentional, crossing the room. "No, please no." "Miss Fraser." His voice was close now, too close. Flora could feel the presence behind her, the weight of attention, and worse, the silent judgment settling over the room. She had no choice. One does not ignore a duke. She released the curtain slowly and turned, and saw him, tall, broad-shouldered beneath a perfectly cut dark coat, hair the shade of chestnuts unsettled by the wind, and his eyes, blue, unwavering, fixed on her as though every other soul in the room had ceased to exist. Flora's heart stumbled. She offered a quick, awkward curtsy, eyes lowered. "Your Grace," she murmured. When she lifted her gaze, he was still looking at her. And there was something in his expression, something Flora could not name. Not pity, not idle curiosity. Something gentler. Something that suggested she was worth looking at. And that terrified her. For Flora Fraser had learned, in 19 careful years, that when men looked at girls like her with interest, the ending was never kind. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Miss Fraser," he said, inclining his head with a respect she had never been granted before. Flora could not speak. She muttered something, she did not know what, and then, Unable to bear the eyes upon her, the whispers, the tightening shame in her aunt's face, she stepped away. "Excuse me, Your Grace. I have tasks to attend to." She did not wait for permission. She left the room as quickly as dignity allowed, through the corridors, up the stairs, into the small room she shared with the governess. There, with no one to see, she pressed her forehead to the cold wood of the door and let her heart race. He looked at me. For the first time in 19 years, someone had looked. Not as the useful niece, nor the girl who adjusted curtains, but as someone worth greeting, worth acknowledging, worth seeing. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. For Flora knew, deep in the quietest part of herself, that men like him did not offer attention out of love. They offered it out of curiosity, out of boredom, out of whim. And when the whim passed, she would be left with a broken heart and a reputation ruined. Flora stepped to the small window. The sky was dimming. September was dying. October would come soon. And with it, winter. She touched the cold glass. Forget it, she told herself. Forget his voice. Forget the way he said your name. Forget everything. But Flora Fraser, who had spent her life forgetting her own wants, found that some looks were impossible to forget. And the Duke of Strathern's eyes had just become one of them. Chapter 2. Only 30 minutes. Flora spent the next 3 days avoiding the Duke of Strathern. Not that it was difficult. She had always been skilled at disappearing. But this time, the disappearing was deliberate, strategic. For after that afternoon in the drawing room, after the way he had looked at her, spoken her name, acknowledged her as though she were someone worthy of respect, Flora understood she needed distance. Men like him were dangerous. Not because they were cruel, but because they made girls like her believe in impossibilities. It was early. Her cousins were still asleep. Lady Cambourne had gone out for her morning visits. The house lay quiet, wrapped in that fragile peace Flora had learned to steal in small, careful doses. 30 minutes in which she did not need to be invisible, did not need to be useful. 30 minutes simply to exist. That was why she stood before the bookshelf now, choosing a volume to fill those precious minutes that belonged to no one but herself. As she pulled one book free, another slipped loose. Pride and Prejudice fell at her feet. Flora stooped to retrieve it, brushing her thumb across the familiar cover like one greets an old companion. Lizzie at least had a proper ball in which to ruin her own life, she murmured, a tired half-smile touching her lips. I haven't even had that. But the smile faded as quickly as it came. Romances were dangerous things. They promised possibilities that were not meant for her. Love, choice, a heart offered freely. Those belonged to another world entirely. She closed the book gently and returned it to it. Better to choose something safer. Something Flora drew out Wordsworth, always Wordsworth with his honest sorrow, and curled into the armchair by the window. The light filtered softly through the glass, warming the pages. She opened to the lines she already knew by heart and began to read, voice barely above a whisper, tasting each sentence like something rare. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. And for the first time that day, she breathed without pain. Lizzie Bennet did not ruin her life, said a deep voice behind her. She saved it, by refusing what was not worth having. The book slipped from Flora's hands. She turned so quickly that her knee struck the tea table. Julian Reed stood near the bookshelf, exactly where she had been moments before, Pride and Prejudice held loosely in his fingers. He replaced it with care, as though he had taken it down only to examine it. He had heard everything. Your Grace! Flora rose too fast, nearly toppling the chair. She dipped into an awkward curtsy. I did not realize you were here. My apologies, I will just— Please don't go, he said. And there was something in his voice, something real. I came to speak with Lady Cambourne. The butler told me she would return shortly and asked that I wait. I wandered the house and happened to reach this room and heard you speak of Miss Elizabeth Bennet. I fear I interrupted something meaningful. Flora felt her face burn. He had seen her speaking aloud, talking to fictional heroines like a foolish girl. It was nothing of importance, Your Grace, she murmured, gaze lowered. Just idle thoughts. Idle? Julian crossed to where Wordsworth had fallen. He lifted the volume, turning its pages. I disagree. There is truth in what you said. Lizzie Bennet did indeed have a ball. A chance to be seen. He paused, choosing his words with disarming care. Seem not to have had the same fortune. Flora's chest tightened. How could he see so much so quickly? I should go, Your Grace, she said, gathering her composure. This is not appropriate. Wordsworth, Julian interrupted, still studying the page. The world is too much with us. Curious. You set aside Jane Austen, who ends in happiness, for Wordsworth, who clings to sorrow till the last. Flora stopped, forgot entirely that she should leave, for no one, in all her years of life in that house, had ever noticed what she read, or why. Wordsworth is honest, she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Jane Austen promises happy endings, promises that girls without fortune may be chosen for love, and I cannot afford to believe in promises like that. Julian lifted his eyes, and Flora realized too late that she had said far too much. She braced herself for laughter, dismissal, gentle mockery. But he did something far more dangerous. He stepped toward her, offering the book back. So you choose melancholy because it is safer than hope, he said softly. Not because you prefer it, but because it wounds less. Flora took the book, but no words came, because he was right. Dangerously, precisely right. I've always found Wordsworth overly somber, he continued, tilting his head. But you read him as though every line is truth. Why? Because it is, Flora answered before thought could stop her. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. He means that we waste our lives chasing what does not matter. And forget to see what does matter, Julian finished quietly. Flora looked up. Green met blue, and for one suspended heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. I was surprised not to see you in the drawing room these past days, he said, gently breaking the silence. Were you avoiding the house, or avoiding me? The question struck like a blow. Flora hugged the book against her chest. I was avoiding no one, Your Grace. I was simply occupied with my duties. Duties that require reading Wordsworth in secret on a Tuesday morning? His voice was too perceptive to be anything but sincere. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Of course he knew. On Tuesdays when no one is about, The sentence died. How could she say it? How explain that these 30 minutes were all she had? You hide to read, Julian said. Not an accusation, but truth. And you must steal time, in a house where you should have every right to it. Girls like me are not meant to have opinions on Wordsworth, Your Grace, Flora said, and bitterness finally bled into her voice. We are meant to embroider, serve tea, and vanish when required. Romances are for girls with futures. Wordsworth is for those who already understand how the story ends. Julian stood very still, and Flora saw something cross his expression, something like quiet, aching recognition. What a waste, he murmured, so softly she almost missed it. What is? To hide a mind like yours, he said. To make you believe that thought is a crime, that intellect must be concealed. It is a terrible waste. Flora's heart stopped, then raced. No one had ever said that. No one had ever seen her mind. Only her usefulness. Only her absence. Voices echoed in the corridor. Her cousins. Too early. Too loud. I must go, she whispered. And this time, it was fear. Because if anyone found them together, Miss Fraser. But Flora was already moving. She slipped past him, nearly dropping the book again, and fled the library, down one corridor, into another, until she reached a narrow storage room full of brooms and linen. She pressed her back to the cold wall and steadied her breath. To hide a mind like yours is a waste. Lizzie saved herself by refusing what wasn't worth having. The words echoed, relentless, dangerous. For the first time in 19 years, someone had seen more in her than utility. Someone had seen intelligence. Someone had seen her. And, worse, someone had seen her loneliness. And Flora Fraser, who had taught herself never to dream, felt hope stirring again, sharp and bright and perilous. Hope that whispered, "What if he is different?" But then came the cold, protective voice that had always kept her safe. "He is not different. He is a duke, and you are nobody. And when his curiosity fades, you will remain here, alone, with a broken heart." Flora closed her eyes and held Wordsworth to her chest. She needed to stop. She needed to pull away. She needed to forget the blue eyes and the impossible words before it was too late. But something told her it was already far, far too late. Chapter 3. A Question of What is Owed. The Strathern family kept their principal residences in 3 places: London, Edinburgh, and a small estate in the Highlands. The Edinburgh house was built of dark stone, with tall windows and tended gardens, discreet enough not to draw attention, yet imposing enough to remind any passer-by that a duke lived there. Julian had come to Edinburgh 3 weeks earlier, fleeing London. Fleeing ambitious mothers, predictable young women, and the life everyone expected him to lead. He intended to stay for a month, perhaps 2, long enough to breathe, to think, to decide what kind of man he wished to be. And then he had met Flora Fraser. Now, 2 hours after leaving the Cambourne residence, he sat in his study with an untouched glass of wine, a sealed envelope, and a decision to make. The invitation had arrived that morning, delivered by messenger: cream paper, elegant script, Lady Cambourne's red wax seal. "A dinner in your honor in 2 days' time, so that your grace may become better acquainted with the family." Julian knew precisely what that meant. Lady Cambourne was hunting, and he was the prize she intended to secure for one of her daughters. Under ordinary circumstances, Julian would have declined politely. Or attended out of boredom, passing the evening behind polite smiles and meaningless conversation. But these were not ordinary circumstances, because all he could think of was the girl in the library, the way she had spoken of Lizzie Bennet, the way she had chosen Wordsworth because happy endings were too painful to believe in. Lizzie at least had a proper ball in which to ruin her own life. I haven't even had that. The words clung to him. There was something devastating in such resignation. Flora was not asking for much. She did not want fortune or title or AG, and life had denied her even that. Julian rose and walked to the window. Beyond it, Edinburgh stretched in tones of stone and mist. The sky was heavy, promising rain. October would soon arrive, and with it, the pressure to return to London, to choose an appropriate wife, to fulfill his duty. But what if I do not want what is appropriate? The thought startled him, but he could not cast it aside. For Flora Fraser, with her downcast eyes and sharp mind hidden out of necessity, was the first real thing he had encountered in years. She did not pretend. She did not calculate. She did not smile when she disagreed. She simply was, brutally, painfully, beautifully honest. And Julian wanted that. He wanted someone who saw him as Julian, not as a duke. He wanted someone who spoke of Wordsworth without fear of being wrong. He wanted someone who chose melancholy not because she loved it, but because hope hurt too much. Because hope hurt too much. Julian closed his eyes. He knew he was stepping across a dangerous line. Flora had no protection. Any interest he showed, even sincere, could ruin her, could destroy her without his ever meaning to. But to do nothing, to leave her invisible, forgotten, wasted in that house, that too was a form of destruction, only slower, crueler, He rang the bell. The footman appeared almost instantly. "Send my acceptance to Lady Cambourne," Julian ordered, "and then bring me Mr. Morrison." "The solicitor, Your Grace?" "No, the private investigator." The footman hesitated only long enough to show he understood the implications, but did not question. He bowed and departed. Julian knew it was improper, but he needed to understand Flora Fraser, not gossip, not rumor, truth, who she had been before she became the invisible niece. What had happened to her parents? How she had come into that house? 15 minutes later, Mr. Morrison entered the study, a discreet, middle-aged man who handled matters requiring silence. "You requested my presence, Your Grace?" "Yes." Julian did not waste words. "I require information about a young woman, Miss Flora Fraser, distant niece of Lady Cambourne. I want to know about her family, her parents, how she came to reside there, everything." Morrison opened a small notebook. "May I ask the reason for Your Grace's interest?" "No," Julian replied simply. Morrison nodded without offense. "It will take 2 days, perhaps 3. 2. Julian placed a heavy purse of coins upon the desk. "And absolute discretion. No one must know I am inquiring. Least of all Miss Fraser herself." "Of course, Your Grace." Morrison took the purse, bowed, and departed. Julian stood alone once more. He returned to the window and watched the clouds gather, dense and dark, over the city. He knew he was making reckless choices a sensible duke would never make. But Julian Reed had spent 26 years being sensible, doing what was expected. And suddenly, the weight of that life felt like a gilded prison. Flora had shown him that, with one conversation about Wordsworth. She had reminded him what it felt like to think, to question, to feel. Julian returned to his desk, not to answer the invitation, that was already done, but to write. To put something down before reason convinced him this was madness. There are 2 kinds of intelligence in the world: the kind cultivated to impress, polished, performative, empty. Girls who recite French without understanding, who play the pianoforte without feeling, who read only enough to appear accomplished at parties, and the kind born of necessity, hidden, fierce, real. Flora Fraser possesses the latter. She reads Wordsworth not to impress, but because she needs his words to go on breathing. She rejects Austen not from cynicism, but because happy endings are luxuries she cannot afford to believe in. And in 26 years among London's elite, I have never seen anything so devastatingly honest. Julian set down the pen, read the words, and understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that he was already lost. Not because of her beauty, though Flora possessed a quiet, sorrowful kind of beauty, but because of her mind, her substance, the way she had awakened something in him long thought dead. He folded the paper and locked it away, then drank the wine in a single burning swallow. 2 days, 2 days, and he would see her again. He would speak to her. He would not allow her to vanish. The night of the dinner arrived cold and rainy. Julian dressed with care, dark coat perfectly tailored, cravat tied with precision, not to impress Lady Cambourne or her daughters, but because, and he could hardly deny it, he wished Flora to see him so. Presentable, worthy. Worthy of what? A cruel voice whispered. "You are a duke, she is nothing." Julian silenced the voice. Because Flora was not nothing, she was merely unseen, and there was a difference. He arrived at the Cambourne residence at 7. The butler greeted him with exaggerated bows and led him to the drawing room where Lady Cambourne and her 3 daughters awaited, dressed in their finest gowns, smiles sharp as blades. "Your Grace, what an honor!" Lady Cambourne sang. Julian greeted them politely, accepted a glass of wine, listened to the daughters speak of weather, of London society, of nothing at all. All the while, his eyes searched the room. Where is Flora? She was nowhere to be found. The dinner began. Soup, bread, laughter too bright, compliments sharpened into fishing hooks. Still, no Flora. Perhaps she was ill, Julian thought. But then, the kitchen door opened, and Flora entered. Not in silk, not in jewels, but in a faded moss-green dress. Hair pinned low, hands steadying a silver dish. Head bowed. She was serving. The room did not notice, but Julian did. Something inside him fractured. He waited until she reached his side, until she offered the dish. "Miss Fraser," he said, clearly, deliberately. Flora froze, lifted her eyes at last, wide, startled. "Your Grace," she whispered. Julian did not look away, did not soften. He simply asked, in a voice that left no room to hide, "Why are you not seated at the table with us?" Silence fell, sharp, ringing, absolute. Lady Cambourne paled. The daughters stared. And Flora? Flora looked as though she might break. "Your Grace," Lady Cambourne laughed weakly. "Flora is merely my distant niece. She assists with the household. She is not—" "She lives under this roof, does she not?" Julian interrupted, voice still courteous but unyielding. "She bears the Fraser name. Surely that entitles her to a seat at her own family's table." The room held its breath. Flora's hands trembled around the dish. Julian turned to her. His voice gentled, warm as autumn sunlight. "Miss Fraser," he said, "would you care to join us?" Her eyes shone, not with joy, but with a grief too deep to name. It would not be proper, Your Grace," she managed. "And why not?" The question sliced through the air. Flora looked at her aunt, then at him, and Julian saw in her gaze everything she had never said aloud. Fear, shame, hope, hunger, despair. "Because I have no place here," she whispered. And those words, quiet but heavy with years of pain, sealed Julian's decision entirely. He rose from his chair. "Then you shall have one," he said, and extended his hand to her. Chapter 4. The seat at the table. Flora could not move. His hand was extended, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. But accepting that hand meant crossing a line. It meant defying Lady Cambourne. It meant stepping above the place she had been assigned 12 years ago. It meant believing she deserved to be there. And Flora Fraser had never believed that. "Miss Fraser," Julian said softly now, though there was something in his tone, something unmistakably like a promise. "Please." Flora felt every other presence in the room fall away. There was only her and this man, this Duke, these blue eyes that saw her in a way no one ever had. "Say no," the voice of caution screamed inside her. "Decline. Apologize and return to the kitchen. Return to where you belong." But then, a smaller voice, faint, almost forgotten, whispered, "What if you belong somewhere else?" Flora looked at his hand. Strong, uncovered, the lines of his palm visible even at a distance. Then she looked at Lady Cambourne. Her aunt's face was bloodless, lips drawn tight, eyes promising consequences that would not be forgotten. Her cousins watched with thinly veiled fury. The room itself held its breath. And Flora made the most terrifying choice of her life. She set the serving dish down, wiped her trembling hands on her worn skirt, and placed her fingers in his. Julian's hand closed around hers, warm, steady, gentle. And then he did something that stole the air from Flora's lungs. He pulled out the chair beside his own, the empty one, the place of honor. "Sit," he said quietly. Only for her. Flora sat. Her legs hardly obeyed her. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared the whole room could hear it. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty plate before her, unable to look up. Julian returned to his seat, lifted his wineglass slightly. "Lady Cambourne," he said, as though nothing extraordinary had happened at all. "Thank you for your hospitality, and the company of your entire family." The words were polite. The steel beneath them was not. Lady Cambourne forced a smile, but her gaze on Flora was venom sharpened. "Of course, Your Grace. Always a pleasure. The dinner continued, but the world had shifted. Lady Penelope attempted to resume her recitation of Byron, but her voice now rang shrill. Miss Caroline offered Julian more wine, but he declined gently. Miss Louisa abandoned all pretense and simply glared. And Flora? Flora was frozen. She did not touch the food Julian quietly served onto her plate. She did not taste the wine he poured into her glass. She merely sat there, struck by the unbearable weight of visibility. To be seen was not simply frightening, it was blinding. "Miss Fraser," Julian said, breaking the oppressive silence around her. "I understand you read frequently. Do you have a favorite author?" He was doing it intentionally. He was creating space for her. He was inviting her in. Flora opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Lady Cambourne cleared her throat sharply. "Flora does not have particularly developed opinions on literature, Your Grace," her aunt said quickly. "She reads simple things, of course, but nothing that would interest someone of your—" "On the contrary," Julian interrupted, turning fully to Flora. "We had a rather fascinating discussion about Wordsworth just days ago. Miss Fraser has a compelling perspective on 'the world is too much with us.' Don't you, Miss Fraser?" His eyes asked her. "Speak. Please, do not let them silence you." Flora felt something stir in her chest, something like courage. She began, the words trembling. "I believe Wordsworth is honest. He does not pretend the world is beautiful when it is not. He admits that it is exhausting, that we waste our strength on things that do not matter." Silence. Lady Cambourne looked as though she might stand and leave. Her daughter stared. And Julian. Julian smiled, softly, genuinely. "Precisely," he said, as though Flora had spoken the clearest truth of the night. "And what do you think does matter, then?" It was a dangerous question, a question that asked for truth, and Flora, for the first time in her life, chose to tell it. "To be seen," she said, her voice steadier now. "Not as ornament, not as function, but as a person, someone who thinks, who feels, who matters." The silence that followed was not empty. It was weighted, because everyone in the room understood exactly what Flora meant. She was not speaking of Wordsworth. She was speaking of herself. Julian did not look away. He simply nodded, slowly. "Then Wordsworth is right," he murmured. "The world truly is wasting something precious." And Flora knew in that instant that she was lost, completely lost to this man with blue eyes and impossible gentleness. The dinner ended in strained silence. Lady Cambourne attempted to salvage the evening with offers of music and tea and forced cheer, but Julian declined every suggestion with graceful finality, claiming early obligations. When he rose to leave, he turned to Flora. "Miss Fraser," he said, bowing lightly, "it was a pleasure speaking with you. I look forward to continuing our discussion soon." Flora curtsied, awkward, breathless, overwhelmed, and then he was gone. The door had hardly closed before Lady Cambourne hissed, "My room, now!" Flora climbed the stairs on shaking legs. She knew what awaited her, but she had underestimated the force of her aunt's fury. "How dare you?" Lady Cambourne spat. "How dare you humiliate me, in front of a duke, in front of my daughters?" "I did not—" "Do not interrupt me." Her aunt stepped closer, voice sharp as glass. "Do you imagine I do not see what you are doing? You are trying to draw his attention, trying to parade yourself, using the scraps of education I gave you, out of charity, to steal what does not belong to you." "That is not true," Flora whispered, tears already burning. "I did not try." "His Grace is a duke," Lady Cambourne hissed. "And you are nothing, the orphaned daughter of a penniless cousin. I took you in, I fed you, clothed you, educated you, and this is your gratitude? Attempting to seduce a man who would never, never look at you as an equal?" The words cut like blades, every one of them. "I am not trying to seduce him," Flora managed, barely audible. He asked for my opinion. I simply— Your opinion? Lady Camborne laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. Girls like you do not have opinions. You have obligations, and yours is to remain invisible. The slap cracked through the air. Flora staggered, hand flying to her cheek. You will not enter the salon for the next 2 days, her aunt said coldly. When His Grace returns, if he returns, you will remain in the kitchen, out of sight, where you belong. Do you understand? Flora did not speak. Do you understand? Yes, she whispered. Then get out of my sight. Flora walked the corridor on unsteady feet, reached her small room, shut the door, and fell. She sank to the cold floor, back against the wood, and wept, for pain, for humiliation, for fear. But also for something else, for the memory of 15 impossible minutes, 15 minutes in which she had been seen, heard, treated as someone who mattered. And now that she had tasted that, now that she had felt what it was to be alive rather than merely present, how could she return to who she had been before? You cannot, a voice whispered. Flora wiped her tears, stood, moved to the window, looked out at the darkened Edinburgh night. Julian Reed had seen her. Not her role, not her usefulness, but her. And that changed everything. Even if he never comes back, she thought, pressing her fingers to the cold glass. Even if it ends here. Someone once cared to see me, and that was worth every consequence. But then, another thought, quiet, trembling, rose inside her. What if he does come back? Flora closed her eyes. She did not dare answer, because if he returned, if he truly cared, she would have to choose between safety and courage, between invisibility and life, and she did not yet know which she was strong enough to choose. Chapter 5. A door that should never have been locked. Julian did not sleep. He spent the entire night in his study, replaying every word Flora had spoken at dinner. To be seen, not as ornament, not as function, but as a person. She had spoken with such quiet grief, such exposed truth. And everyone at the table, every one of them, pretended not to understand, but Julian understood perfectly. When the first cold, pale light of morning crept over Edinburgh, he already knew what he would do. He would go to the Camborne residence. He would speak to Flora again, and this time, he would not allow her to vanish. He dressed carefully and left just after breakfast. But when he arrived at the Camborne house at 9 in the morning, a time utterly improper for social calls, he knew something was wrong. The butler greeted him with exaggerated courtesy, but there was tension in the air. Lady Camborne appeared almost immediately, too quickly, as if she had been waiting, as if she needed to intercept him before he could act. "Your Grace! What a wonderful surprise!" she trilled, though the smile did not reach her eyes. "We were not expecting callers this early." "I happened to be passing nearby," Julian lied smoothly, holding a volume of poetry he had selected solely as a pretext. "I wished to return a book we discussed last night, and I hoped perhaps to speak again with Miss Fraser. Our conversation was illuminating." The smile faltered. "How unfortunate," Lady Camborne said at once. "Flora is indisposed this morning. A dreadful headache. I'm afraid she cannot receive visitors." Julian studied her face. Something was wrong. Something was being hidden. "I see," he said slowly. "Then perhaps I might leave the book with her, for when she is feeling better." "That will not be necessary. I will see to it." "I insist," Julian interrupted, polite but immovable. "It is a promise I made to her. I would not care to break my word." Lady Camborne's face blanched. She opened her mouth, closed it again. "Your Grace, truly I do not think it appropriate." "Lady Camborne," Julian said, stepping forward, "I will ask once. Where is Miss Fraser?" Silence. A silence so sharp it seemed to crack. "She is resting." As I said, a terrible— Then you will not object if I ensure her well-being personally, Julian replied, already turning toward the staircase. If she is so unwell, perhaps she requires a physician. I will send for mine at once. Your Grace! Lady Cambourne nearly ran after him. This is not proper. A young woman in her private rooms— Julian stopped halfway up the stairs and turned. And for the first time, he let the mask fall. Lady Cambourne, he said quietly, and his voice was ice. I will ask you one more time. What did you do to Miss Fraser after I left last night? Answer me, or I will open every door in this house until I find her. I am well aware of how she is treated here. Her face went from pale to scarlet in an instant. I did nothing. How dare you? Is she hurt? Julian descended one step, then another, each movement deliberate. Was she punished for sitting at the table? For speaking? For my requesting her presence? Your accusations are— Where is her room? Julian asked. Low, dangerous. I will not— Where? The single word echoed down the corridor like a command from judgment itself. It was the butler who spoke. An old man, tired. Perhaps tired of pretending not to see. Top floor, Your Grace. Last door on the left. Julian took the stairs 3 at a time. He did not hear Lady Cambourne shouting behind him. He did not care. The top floor was hardly a floor at all. It was the servants' garret. The place one put someone meant to be forgotten. He knocked. Miss Fraser? Silence. Miss Fraser, it's me, Julian Reed. Please open the door. Nothing. He tried the handle. Locked. From the outside. There was a key in the lock. He turned it. The door opened, and Julian stopped cold. Flora was sitting on the floor beside a narrow bed, her knees drawn to her chest. Her dress was rumpled. Her hair had come loose, and on her cheek, on the delicate cheek that had finally smiled the day before, was the dark, clear print of a hand. She looked up when he entered, her eyes, green, swollen from weeping. Your Grace, she whispered, trying to stand. You should not be here. Please, go. Before she— Julian crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt before her. Who did this? He asked, his voice trembling with contained fury. It was nothing. Flora turned her face away. I deserved it. I caused embarrassment. I should not have taken your hand. I should not have sat at the table. I should not have spoken. I knew what would happen, and yet— You did not deserve this, Julian interrupted, and there was something broken in his voice. Not one moment, not one breath of it. He released her face and stood. The anger in his chest now was not a flame. It was a wildfire. Stay here, he said. I will return in 5 minutes. Your Grace, don't— But Julian was already gone. He descended the stairs with such force the banister shook. Lady Cambourne and her daughters stood in the corridor below, pale with waiting. Julian stopped in front of her. You struck her, he said. Not a question. A verdict. Your Grace, family discipline is— You struck her, Julian repeated, stepping closer. Because she sat at the table, because she answered when spoken to, because she existed. And then you locked her in a servant's room as though she were property. She lives here out of charity. Charity? Julian's voice rose, sharp enough to cut. You call it charity to treat her as a servant? To deny her a place at her own family's table? To beat her for daring to breathe where you could see her? Lady Cambourne went white. She is manipulative, she tried. She is trying to ensnare you. Be silent, Julian said, low and lethal. You will not speak of her again. You will not say her name. You will not refer to her at all. Do you understand? How dare you? Do you understand? Julian thundered, taking another step. Lady Cambourne stumbled back. The hallway fell silent. Now, Julian continued, his voice steady again only through sheer force. I am going upstairs. I am taking Miss Fraser with me. She will leave this house today. You will not stop her. She has nowhere to go. She has a place, Julian said. She will come with me. I will arrange suitable lodgings with a respectable companion, and then— He did not hesitate. I will marry her. The shock rippled like a gasp of wind. Lady Cambourne swayed. Her daughters froze. Even the butler blinked, stunned. Mary? Your Grace, this is lunacy. Society will— To hell with society, Julian said calmly. I will not leave her here another hour. If scandal is required, I accept it. He turned and climbed the stairs again. Flora was standing now, hands clasped tightly, eyes wide. Your Grace, she whispered. I heard what you said downstairs. You cannot be serious about— Marrying you? Julian finished gently. I have never been more serious. Flora shook her head, tears returning. You do not know me. You know nothing of my past. You are acting out of pity, or out of anger. But it is not real. And I cannot be someone's charity disguised as affection. Flora, Julian said, and it was the first time he spoke her name alone. She looked up. I am not acting out of pity, he said quietly. I am acting because these past days, you have made me think. You have made me feel. You have made me question everything I believed I wanted. You are intelligent, honest, brave. And I would be a fool to leave you here. But I have nothing, she whispered. No fortune, no respectable name. You have you, Julian said, taking her hands. And that is all that matters. Flora closed her eyes. A sob shook her. I am afraid. I know, Julian said, tightening his hold. Come with me anyway. Trust me, please. Flora was silent for a long, trembling moment. Then she nodded. All right. 15 minutes later, Julian Reed left the Cambourne residence with Flora Fraser beside him. She carried nothing but the dress she wore. There was nothing in that little garret worth keeping. Lady Cambourne shouted from the doorway. Threats, curses, promises of social ruin. Julian did not look back. He simply helped Flora into the carriage and said, Home. Quickly. And as the carriage pulled away, as Flora curled into the seat and wept softly, Julian made the final decision. There would be no return, no undoing, no hesitation. Flora Fraser would be his wife, and he did not care what it cost. Chapter 6. Where Choice Begins. Flora did not speak for the entire drive to Julian's residence. She sat curled in the corner of the carriage, arms wrapped around herself, staring out the window without seeing anything at all. Her cheek still burned where Lady Cambourne had struck her. Her heart hammered until it hurt. And her mind. Her mind was a storm of fear, hope, disbelief. He said he will marry me. The words echoed, impossible, absurd, and yet he had said them. He had said them before Lady Cambourne, before the cousins, before the servants. He had said them clearly, without hesitation. And now Flora was in a duke's carriage, on the way to his house, with no chaperone, no plan, no notion of what would come next. This is madness, she thought. This is scandal. This will ruin us both. But a smaller part of her, frightened, yearning, stubbornly alive, whispered something else. What if it is real? Julian's house was larger than Flora had imagined. Not ostentatious like some of the grander homes she had glimpsed in Edinburgh, but imposing all the same. The carriage drew up to the entrance. Julian stepped down first and offered his hand. Flora hesitated. She looked at his hand, then at the house, then back to him. Your Grace, she began, her voice rough. I cannot. This is not proper. If anyone learns that I am here, alone, without— You will not be alone, Julian said gently. My housekeeper is Mrs. Dawson, a respectable widow of firm years and firmer views on decorum. She will serve as your companion while I make the proper arrangements. Flora blinked. Arrangements? For our marriage, he said simply, as though it were the most natural sentence in the world. The ground tilted. Flora steadied herself against the carriage door. Your Grace, you cannot. You cannot truly intend. Flora, he said. Her name again, and the way he spoke it unraveled her resolve. Come inside. Please. We will talk there. First you must eat, then rest. After that we may speak of everything. He kept his hand extended, waiting, patient, and Flora, too exhausted to resist, accepted it. Mrs. Dawson was exactly as Julian had described. White hair, straight spine, eyes that measured Flora in 3 seconds and missed nothing. But when she saw the bruise blooming at Flora's eye and the red print on her cheek, something softened. Good heavens, she murmured. Who did this to you, my dear? Flora opened her mouth, but no words came. It does not matter who, Julian said, steady. It will not happen again. Mrs. Dawson, this is Miss Flora Fraser. She will stay with us until the arrangements for our wedding are complete. Please prepare the blue guest room, and perhaps a hot bath, and food. She has eaten scarcely anything for days. Mrs. Dawson studied him a long moment, then nodded. I understand, Your Grace. And there was a note in her voice that said, I may not know what this is, but I trust you. 30 minutes later, Flora stood in a room that felt like a dream. Pale blue walls, white silk curtains, a great bed with clean, soft linens, a copper tub brimming with fragrant hot water, and on the coverlet, a simple but new dress, dark blue, well made, which Mrs. Dawson explained had once belonged to a visiting cousin who had quite forgot it when she left. Flora stood in the middle of the room, trembling. Not from cold, from shock, from fear, from something she could not name. She had never had a room like this, never slept in sheets that did not scratch, never worn a dress that was hers first. She had never been treated as someone who mattered, and now it was offered freely, by a man who scarcely knew her. By a duke who could have had any woman in London and yet had chosen her. Why? The question followed her, because nothing made sense. None of it. She moved to the window and looked down at the gardens. Why are you doing this? She thought, directing the question toward the man somewhere below. Why risk everything for me? A knock sounded. Come in, Flora said, her voice small. Mrs. Dawson entered with a tray, soup, bread, tea. His Grace asked me to bring something light, the housekeeper said, setting the tray on the table by the window. He also asked that, when you are ready, you join him in the study. Only when you are ready. There is no hurry. Flora nodded. Mrs. Dawson turned to go, then paused. Miss Fraser, she said, facing her again. May I offer a word? Yes, Flora whispered. I have known His Grace since he was a boy, Mrs. Dawson said gravely. I have seen him make many decisions, a few wise, a few reckless, but never, never have I seen him so decided as he is today. Whatever moved him to take you from that house was not a fancy, it was conviction. She held Flora's gaze. So do not doubt him, dear. Doubt many things if you must, but not him. She left, closing the door softly. Flora stood very still, letting the words settle. Then she crossed to the tray and ate, not from hunger, but because she needed to do something, anything, to quiet the swirl in her head. An hour later, clean and dressed in the dark blue gown that fit as though it had been made for her, Flora went downstairs toward the study. Her heart stumbled. She did not know what Julian would say. She did not know what she herself could say. She only knew she needed answers. She knocked. Come in. Julian stood behind a mahogany desk strewn with papers. At the sight of her, he rose at once. Miss Fraser, he said, are you feeling better? I am, she answered, and it was true, at least in body. Thank you for your kindness. He gestured to the chair opposite. Please, sit. Flora folded her hands in her lap. Julian returned to his side of the desk, but he did not sit. He paced, as though stilling himself cost effort. You have questions, he said at last. Many, Flora admitted, then lifting her chin. But the chief one is this. Why? Why are you doing this? Why would you risk your name, your future, for someone like me? Julian regarded her a long moment. Because you reminded me of what matters, he said simply. Because in 2 days, you have been more real with me than anyone has been in years. Because when you speak of Wordsworth, I hear passion. When you speak of being seen, I see courage. And because this morning, when I saw the mark on your cheek and the bruise at your eye, I felt a rage I have never known. A rage that told me something important. What? She whispered. That I cannot live knowing you are suffering, Julian said quietly. I cannot return to London, select a suitable heiress, and forget the humiliation you endure in that house. I cannot pretend I never met you. Because I did. And that changes everything. Tears burned. Flora blinked them back. But you do not truly know me, she said, her voice shaking. We have spoken twice. You have seen 2 days of my life. How can you be certain this is not pity, or worse, a whim? Julian finally sat. He opened a drawer, drew out a folded sheet, and turned it toward her. Read, he said. Flora took the paper with unsteady hands and read. There are 2 kinds of intelligence in the world. The kind polished to impress, decorative, performative, hollow, and the kind born of survival, hidden, fierce, real. Flora Fraser has the latter. She reads Wordsworth not to impress, but because she needs his words to keep breathing. She rejects Austen not out of disdain, but because happy endings are promises she cannot afford to believe. And I have never seen anything so devastatingly honest in all my life. Flora stopped, the lines blurred with tears. You wrote this? I did, Julian said. The night after we spoke in the library. I had to put it down before reason convinced me I was mad. He leaned forward, eyes steady on hers. Flora, I do not know what the future holds. I do not know whether we will be happy. I do not know whether this will work. But I know this. You deserve more than that house allowed you. You deserve to be seen, to be heard. You deserve to be loved. And do you think you can love me? Flora asked, pain bright in her voice. A duke, and a nobody. You are not a nobody, he said, firm. As for loving you, I do not know. Not yet. But I want to try. I want the chance to find out. Flora brushed her tears away and drew a breath. And if I say no? She asked. If I refuse? Julian was quiet for a moment. Then I will accept it, he said at last. I will secure a house for you, far from Lady Cambourne, with an income to live with dignity, and you will be free to make of your life what you will. Flora stared at him, startled. You would do that? I would, he said, because this is not about relieving my conscience or about pity. It is about giving you a choice, something you have never truly had. So choose, Flora. Freely. Marry me or do not. Either way, you will not return to that house. Either way, you are free. And it was then, hearing those words, seeing the unguarded sincerity in his blue eyes, that Flora Fraser made the most important decision of her life. She rose, crossed to the desk, and offered her hand. Then I choose, she said, her voice steady for the first time. I choose to try. Julian took her hand and smiled. A true smile, one that seemed to light his whole face. Then we will try, he said, together. And for the first time in 19 years, Flora Fraser felt something she had never truly known. Hope, not the fragile kind that hurt, but the strong kind, the kind worth fighting for. Chapter 7. Letters and Lines in the Sand. The first letter arrived 6 days later. Julian was in his study, reviewing provisions for a marriage settlement, one unlike any a duke had ever signed, when the footman entered with a silver tray. 3 letters, all urgent, all from London. He knew the seal on the first before he broke it, his mother, the Dowager Duchess of Strathern. He cracked the wax and read, Julian, rumor reached London before you had the decency to inform me yourself. They say you were seen leaving the Cambourne residence with an unknown girl. They say you installed her in your house without a suitable chaperone. They say, and heaven help us if it is true, that you intend to marry her. A girl with no family, no dowry, no position. Return to London at once before this scandal destroys what our family has built for generations. This is not a request. It is an order. Your mother. Julian folded the letter and laid it upon the desk. He did not crush it. He did not tear it. He simply set it down. The second was from Lord Holloway, an old friend of his father. Strathern, I have heard. As one who held your father in high esteem, I feel bound to warn you. You are making a mistake that will cost not only your reputation but your political and social future. No respectable door will open to a duke married beneath himself. Alliances will be questioned, business compromised, the Strathern name stained. Reconsider while there is time. Send the girl away with a generous income, marry suitably, and the scandal will be forgotten in 6 months. Proceed, and the consequences will be permanent. Holloway. Julian placed this atop the first, without comment, without reply. The third had arrived 2 days after he had taken Flora. It bore Lady Cambourne's seal. Julian almost laughed when he saw it. Your Grace, I humbly beg you to reconsider your precipitous actions. Flora is a troublesome girl with an ungovernable temper and ambitions above her station. She has clearly ensnared you with feigned learning and false humility. If your Grace still desires an appropriate wife, my daughter Penelope would be honored to accept your proposal. We may forget this regrettable incident and proceed as if nothing had occurred. I await your reply with anticipation. Lady Cambourne. Julian did not place this one upon the desk. He tore it into confetti and let the pieces fall into the fire. Then he drew paper and pen and composed the 2 answers that deserved one. Half an hour later, he had finished them. The first, to his mother, was the hardest to write. Mother, the rumors are correct. I am going to marry Miss Flora Fraser. She is intelligent, learned, honest, and brave. She has neither fortune nor title, but she possesses what no heiress in London has ever offered me: substance. I understand this causes discomfort, but my duty as Duke is not merely to preserve our name, it is to honor it. I honor it more by marrying a woman I admire than by fulfilling empty expectations. I hope in time that you will know Flora. And when you do, you will understand. Even if you do not, my decision is made. Your son, Julian. The second reply was brief. Lord Holloway, I thank you for your concern, but I disagree with your conclusions. A man who sacrifices his integrity for social convenience does not deserve the title he bears. The consequences you name are social and political, temporary, superficial. The consequences of betraying my principles would be permanent and internal. I choose to live with the former. Strathern. He sent no answer to Lady Cambourne. She did not merit the paper. 3 days later, just when Julian thought the worst of the storm had blown over, Lord Holloway arrived in person. He came unannounced in the middle of the afternoon, grave of face and unmovable of purpose. Strathern, he said, entering the study without waiting to be bid. We must speak. Julian rose, but he did not smile. Lord Holloway. I did not expect you. I came because someone must make you see reason, the older man said, sinking into a chair. Before it is too late. There is nothing to see, Julian replied evenly. My decision is made. You mean to marry her, truly? I do. Why? Holloway leaned forward. For heaven's sake, why? What can that girl possess to justify throwing away your future? She possesses honesty, Julian said. She possesses an intelligence that is genuine rather than performed. She possesses courage. And she makes me wish to be a better man. You are already a duke, Holloway snapped. You need not be better. You need only be proper. Then perhaps I am tired of being merely proper. Holloway was silent for a time. Then he sighed, heavy as winter. Do you know what will happen? He asked. Do you know the doors that will close? The invitations that will not come? The alliances that will wither when you marry outside your class? I do, Julian said, and inclined his head. And I do not care. You do not care, the older man nearly shouted. Strathern, you are young. You believe love is enough. It is not. Marriage is alliance. It is business. It is my life, Julian said, firm, cutting him off. And I will live it as I choose, not as society dictates. Holloway studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. A small, sorrowful smile. You sound like your father, he said quietly. When he was young, before the world tamed him, he was idealistic just as you are. What happened? Life happened. Holloway rose. And for your sake, I hope you prove stronger than he did. He reached the door, then paused. One last question, Strathern. Do you love her? Truly? Not even love can justify such folly, but it will help me understand. Julian hesitated, not from doubt, but because the question was more complicated than it seemed. Not yet, he said, honest. But I am learning, and she makes me want to learn. Holloway nodded, slow. Then perhaps you are wiser than I thought, or more foolish. Time will tell. He left. That night, Julian was alone in the study when a knock sounded. Come in. Mr. Morrison, the investigator, entered, leather portfolio in hand, expression grave. Your Grace, I have what you requested. Information regarding Miss Flora Fraser. Julian motioned him to sit. What have you learned? Morrison opened the portfolio and drew out several papers. Miss Flora Fraser is the daughter of James Fraser, a distant cousin of Lady Cambourne. James was a solicitor, modest means, respectable standing. He married Anne Sutherland, the daughter of a vicar. They had one child only, Flora. Julian leaned forward, attentive. Go on. James Fraser died 12 years ago of a sudden illness. He left debts, not many, but sufficient to force the sale of his small property. Anne, Flora's mother, died 6 months later. Some say of grief, I suspect the same illness. And Flora? She was 7 when she was taken into Lady Cambourne's house, Morrison said, consulting his notes. There were no other relations to claim her. Lady Cambourne was the only family left. She agreed to raise the child, but as a disguised servant rather than as a true niece. The familiar fire rose in Julian's chest. Anything more? Yes. Morrison hesitated. I looked into Lady Cambourne as well. I found something interesting. What is it? When James Fraser died, there was money. Not a fortune, but enough to educate the girl properly. Perhaps even provide a small dowry. That money was placed in trust for Flora, with Lady Cambourne named as guardian until the girl came of age. Julian went very still. And? Given Miss Fraser's circumstances, I do not believe she ever saw a penny. I do not believe she even knew it existed. Silence dropped like a blade. Julian rose, walked to the window, drew a slow breath. So Lady Cambourne not only treated her as a servant, he said, forcing the words through his teeth. She stole the future her father tried to secure. Yes, Your Grace. Can the money be recovered? Legally, difficult, Morrison admitted. 12 years have passed, and Lady Cambourne will have covered her tracks. But, if Your Grace were to apply social pressure, threaten a public exposure of the theft, Lady Cambourne would likely return it to avoid scandal. Julian considered this a long while. No, he said at last. I will not use it. Not yet. Keep the information. If Lady Cambourne attempts to defame Miss Fraser, we will answer. Understood, Your Grace. Morrison bowed and withdrew. Julian stood alone again, gazing down at the papers strewn across the desk. Flora's life, set out in ink. A child who had lost everything, robbed, used, erased, and yet she had kept her mind sharp, her spirit alive, her soul intact. How? He wondered. How does one survive such things and still quote Wordsworth? Still argue about what matters? The answer came, clear and simple. Because she is stronger than all of them. Stronger than Lady Cambourne. Stronger than the society that tried to grind her down. And she deserves everything I can give. Julian drew a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not a reply to anyone, but a list. Arrangements for the marriage. Special license. Apply to the Archbishop. 2 days. Marriage settlement. Ensure Flora's independent property and income. Bridal gown. Mrs. Dawson to take Flora to the finest modiste in Edinburgh. Announcement in London. Make plain this is not scandal, but choice. Recover the stolen funds. A wedding gift for Flora. He paused, reread the list, added a final line. Make her happy. He folded the paper and put it away. Then he snuffed the candle and went upstairs. In the corridor, he passed the guest room where Flora slept. A thin bar of light glowed beneath the door. For a moment, he considered knocking, speaking, reassuring her. He did not. Flora needed room. She needed to reckon with all that had changed in so few days. She needed to be certain, on her own, that she had chosen rightly. So Julian walked on. But as he lay down and closed his eyes, one certainty rang through him like a vow. I will not yield. I will not turn back. No matter how many letters arrive, no matter how many doors close. Flora Fraser will be my wife, and I will spend the rest of my life proving she chose well. Chapter 8. To choose fear or courage. Flora spent 10 days at Julian's residence, 10 days in which she was treated as an honored guest. 10 days during which Mrs. Dawson accompanied her to walks, to the modiste, to the bookstore. 10 days in which she dined at the table with Julian, spoke of books, of Edinburgh, of everything and nothing. 10 days in which he was perfect, attentive, respectful, gentle. And with every passing day, Flora's fear grew. Because all of it was too good. Too perfect. And Flora had learned over 19 years that things which were too good always came with a price. On the morning of the 11th day, she woke with a cold certainty tightening her chest. I cannot do this. It was not about love. Flora did not expect love. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But she could live with respect, with companionship, with the trying. The problem was something else entirely. He has no idea what he is choosing. Flora rose, dressed quietly, and for the first time in those 11 days, did not go down to breakfast. Instead, she remained by the window, trying to gather courage for what needed to be done. Because each day that passed, Julian became more publicly committed. More letters arrived from London. More conversation. More whispers. The harder it would be for him to retreat when he realized the mistake he'd made. And Flora could not allow him to ruin his future on her behalf. A knock sounded. Miss Fraser, Mrs. Dawson's voice. His Grace is worried. You did not come to breakfast. I'm well, Flora said carefully. I only need a little time alone. Silence. Then, he asked me to tell you that, when you wish to speak with him, he will be in the study. He will wait. Footsteps receded. Flora closed her eyes, steadied her breath. Now. It had to be now. Before it was too late. An hour later, she went down the stairs. Her heart beat so loudly she was certain the house could hear it. Her hands trembled, but Flora held her head high, shoulders square. If she was going to do this, she would do it with dignity. She knocked on the study door. Come in. Julian was seated at his desk, surrounded by papers. He rose at once when he saw her, relief softening his features. Flora, I was worried. Are you— No, Flora said. I'm not. The relief vanished. He motioned to a chair. Please, sit. But Flora did not sit. She needed to remain standing, or she would waver. I've come to tell you that I cannot marry you, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. Silence fell like a blade. Julian didn't react at first. Then he slowly sat down. Why? He asked. There was no anger in his voice, only quiet hurt. Because you don't know what you're choosing, Flora said. With each day that passes, you bind yourself to this more publicly. Your mother writes. The peerage whispers. Every letter begs you to reconsider. And one day you will realize they were right, and it will be too late. An error, Julian repeated softly. You think this is an error. I think it is madness, Flora said, her voice shaking. You are a duke. You could have any woman in London, and you are choosing the one who will ruin your future. How could that not be madness? Because you will ruin nothing, Julian said, rising. Flora, you are letting fear speak. You are listening to the voices of those who taught you to believe you deserve. This is not fear, Flora cut in, and for the first time there was anger in her voice. This is logic, reality. You think I don't hear things? The servants whisper. Mrs. Dawson tries to hide it, but even she fears this is too fast. The letters from London do not stop. I know every one of them begs you to abandon this. And what of it? Julian stepped closer. Flora, I do not. But I do, she cried, and then softer, breaking. But I do. Because when you eventually realize I am not worth the cost, when the exhaustion of defending me becomes too heavy, when the reality of society's disdain outweighs whatever you feel now, you will resent me. And I cannot. I cannot live knowing that one day you might look at me and regret me. Tears fell freely now. She didn't wipe them away. So I release you, Flora whispered. You don't need to do this. You may still give me the house, the income, and I will go. And you may return to London and marry someone suitable and be miserable for the rest of my life, Julian said quietly. Flora blinked. What? You think I would be happy? Julian asked, stepping closer. Marrying a woman who never challenges me, who agrees with every word I say, who offers nothing real? You think that is what I want? It would be safer, Flora whispered. Safe, Julian repeated, almost laughing. Flora, I spent 26 years being safe, doing what was expected, fulfilling obligations, and do you know what it brought me? He took one more step. Emptiness, boredom, the sense that I was wasting my life. He reached her now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray-blue in his eyes. And then I met you. And for the first time, I felt alive. Flora swallowed. But what if you regret it? She whispered. What if one morning you wake and realize you chose wrong? And what if I wake every morning grateful that I chose you? Julian countered. You cannot know that. No, he agreed. Because none of us knows the future. Not you. Not I. But I know this. The thought of you leaving hurts more than any scandal ever could. He lifted her chin gently, barely touching. She closed her eyes. Her breath trembled. Tell me one thing, he murmured. Do you not want to marry me because you do not want me? Or because you are afraid to want me? The question shattered what remained of her defenses. Flora opened her eyes and spoke the truth. I am afraid, she whispered. Afraid to believe this is real. Afraid of losing something I have never had. Afraid of happiness, because I have never known it, and I do not know how to live inside it. Julian cupped her face gently but firmly. Then we will learn, he said. Together. Because I am afraid too. Afraid of failing you. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid you might someday see I am only a man, not the hero you imagine. He leaned his forehead to hers. But the only thing more frightening than trying is not trying at all. He drew back just enough to look into her eyes. So tell me, Flora Fraser, will you let fear win, or will you have the courage to try? A long, trembling silence, and then, Flora chose. Not the safe choice, not the logical choice, the brave one. I want to try to be brave, she whispered. I will be afraid every day. I will doubt. I will question. But I want to try. Julian's smile was soft and bright and full. That is all I ask, he said. One day at a time. One day at a time, Flora repeated. And for the first time since the night she left the Camborne house, she allowed herself to believe, maybe this is real. Maybe I deserve this. Maybe happy endings are not just for characters in novels. Julian drew her into his arms, and Flora let herself rest, her cheek to his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that grounded her. After a long moment, he spoke. There is something I must tell you. Flora drew back slightly. What is it? I had your past investigated. Your father, your mother, and Lady Camborne. Flora went still. Why? Because I needed to know the truth, Julian said. And we found something important. He showed her the documents, explained the trust, the money, the theft. When he finished, Flora was silent, pale. She stole from me? Yes, Julian said quietly, and I can recover it, through law or through pressure. The choice is yours. Flora did not respond at once. She sat with it, felt the anger, the betrayal, the grief. And then, astonishingly, she exhaled. I do not want the money, she said. I do not want revenge. I want to move forward, to build something new. Something that is mine. Julian studied her, something reverent in his gaze. You are sure? Yes, Flora said. Because if I keep looking back at what was taken, I will never be able to look toward what I might have. And in that moment, Julian knew with absolute certainty he had chosen correctly. Because Flora Fraser was not simply brave or intelligent. She was wise. Then forward, Julian said softly, offering his hand. Flora took it. Forward, she whispered. And this time, she smiled without fear. Chapter 9. The Courage to Stay Edinburgh. 3 months later, Flora Reed, Duchess of Strathearn, stood by the window of the drawing room. Not the same window where, months before, she had adjusted green curtains trying to disappear, but the window of her home. This time, she was not hiding. She was not invisible. She was simply there, watching the soft December light spill into the room, turning warm gold against the stone walls, and glimmering over the gold band on her finger. The wedding had been quiet. No ballroom, no orchestra, no aristocratic audience watching. Just herself, Julian, Mrs. Dawson, 2 witnesses, and a kind-faced vicar who had asked gently whether they were sure. Flora had said yes without hesitation, and when Julian slid the ring onto her finger and whispered, "Now you have your ball," Flora had cried, not from sorrow, but from something she had never believed she would feel. Belonging. The weeks after had not been easy. Cruel letters arrived. Invitations were withdrawn. Some old allies of the Strathearn family grew distant. And more than once, Flora woke in the middle of the night, trembling, afraid she had stepped into a life she had no right to claim. But Julian was always there, holding her hand, steady, certain, patient, reminding her that brave choices always demand a price, but they also bring reward. And the reward, Flora discovered, was freedom. Freedom to read without hiding. Freedom to speak without apology. Freedom to exist, fully, quietly, truly. She touched the cold glass of the window and smiled. Not the small, careful smile she used to offer the world, but a smile that belonged to someone who had learned that being seen was not danger. It was healing. Julian watched her from the doorway. She had not noticed him enter. She was lost in thought, her fingers resting against the window pane, the winter light outlining her profile like a painting. And Julian felt, as he felt every day, he had chosen rightly. The last 3 months had tested that decision. His mother still refused to visit. Some political conversations had grown colder. And there were brief, quiet moments when Julian wondered whether he could protect Flora from all that would come. But then she would smile, or quote Wordsworth over breakfast, or challenge him on some trivial point. And Julian remembered, this is real. This is worth everything. Because Flora was not a wife who pretended, not a duchess performing a role. She was simply herself, honest, fierce, vulnerable, strong. And loving her made him want to be better. Not a better duke. A better man. He crossed the room to her. She turned, and her face lit softly when she saw him. I was thinking about you, she said. I hope kindly, Julian replied, taking his place beside her. The kindest, Flora said, smiling. Then quieter. Thank you. For what? For giving me my ball, she said, echoing the words he had once spoken at the altar. For teaching me that happy endings are not only for storybooks. Julian took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Then we are learning together, he said, because you taught me something too. What? That titles do not grant worth, that courage does not come from status, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose love instead of convenience. They stood there a long while, side by side, watching the winter light sweep across the city. Flora rested her head on Julian's shoulder. He drew her close. And there, in the quiet of their home, bathed in golden light where shadows once lived, Flora Ann Fraser Reed, who once taught herself